Okay, welcome to today's webinar, which is about conceptual versus theoretical framework. And we hope that after the end of the webinar, you will understand the main difference in between a conceptual and a theoretical framework, to recognize the key steps in developing a framework, and to learn through the discussion about conceptualization, application, and examples of conceptual and/or theoretical frameworks. Let me introduce us. I'm one of the co-founders of the Doctorate Hub, Dr. Andreas Meisner, and have the honor to have as panelists today Professor Valerie Lindsay and Professor Bostjan Gomiscek. And I would like to give the two the chance to briefly introduce themselves. Valerie, would you perhaps want to give it a start?
Sure, thank you, Dr. Andreas. Dr. Valerie Lindsay. I'm currently located in the UAE and have been here for around 10 years. Prior to that, I worked in New Zealand in 3 universities there and obtained my PhD from Warwick University in the UK. I'm delighted to be here. I think along with Prof. Bostjan, have a fair degree of experience to share with you, and we hope we can be of value to you today in your PhD doctorate journey. I'll hand over now to Prof. Bostjan to introduce himself.
Thank you. That's correct. I mean, we have done quite many challenging, how should I say, cases, and majority has definitely then submitted and successfully completed their PhDs and DBAs. So yeah, my name is Bostjan Gomiscek. How should I say, my passion is actually really working with the PhD students. That is the nicest part, I would say, of our job. We have worked with many in Europe. We have worked actually with many. I'm based in the UAE as well right now, but before I was actually working in Austria and Slovenia. And as I mentioned, we have actually worked with many PhD students. Both of us have actually, should I say, guided or even managed the PhD programs at 2 different universities. So a little bit of experience is there, and I hope we will be benefiting from that. But the most important part is what actually Dr. Andreas has mentioned: cooperation today, interaction, and many questions. That's the most important part. We'll be quite short with our introduction, and after that, I hope we'll be trying actually to discuss your cases and help you to do that important step forward towards, as I have said before, actually completing your PhD. An important step is a theoretical or conceptual framework.
Thank you very much. As to the format of today's webinar, Professor Bostjan will give it a go and provide a scene-setting introduction, and afterwards we open the round for discussion. And there you are very much welcome to also contribute actively. So with this, and if you after the webinar see that you need a bit more training on that matter, we do offer also workshops, and we have 1 half-day workshop scheduled for 4th of March. And alternatively, we have one-on-one workshops that are available at any point in time. If you want to learn more about that, just follow those links. And with this, some introductory questions that Professor Bostjan will now go through. It's like a theoretical one, framework and conceptual framework. Are they the same? What type of framework are you planning to use? How do you plan to develop your conceptual framework, and how do you test it? With this, over to you, Professor Bostjan.
Thank you, Andreas. So yeah, if you can go back, probably maybe we can to the previous one. Maybe no, to the previous one.
Yeah.
Can I work as well with those or not? I cannot. Back. Not.
Yeah. It's not going back, unfortunately.
Going forward.
Yeah, I see it.
Don't.
That way works.
Yeah, exactly. That was. I mean, as I said, I hope you will ask many questions, or at least some questions. And this is actually rather for you, not just for us to explain that and try to make it clear for you. Have you ever asked yourself this question? Is a theoretical framework the same as the conceptual framework? At what stage are you right now? What are you thinking about? Are you rather at the theoretical, let's say, stage where you have been reading a lot and you are trying maybe to find research gaps and based on that develop your theoretical framework? Or are you somewhere else? And usually whenever you start a business case, you will probably, in most of the cases, start thinking about a conceptual framework. And what we would like to say today or discuss today, are they the same? I mean, I guess what I have already said, let us actually pick this one. Definitely not, but they are in a way linked. And that's another idea what we have to discuss, because without theory, I would say there's actually no PhD. So that will be kind of the idea. The next question, what kind of framework are you really planning to use? And especially why? Because that will be hell of the job actually to justify why have you picked exactly that framework. And for that, once again, you will probably need actually to have a good support from the theoretical perspective as well. So that is a really important part. After you have finished your conceptualization, you will have to develop a framework, and this framework has to be justified. You cannot just bring it from somewhere and say, okay, that's my framework, I want to do that. That will actually not be good enough. And then another question is, how do you plan to develop your conceptual framework? What are the elements? Where are you actually sourcing your, if I draw a simple one, where are you sourcing your, let's say, constructs? Where are they coming from? Why are you taking exactly these ones? Why do you think that these relationships are there? Why do you think that actually, as the whole, will really actually give new results, will be a contribution to the literature? So these things are really, really important. And that's why before we started actually our webinar, we have just shortly discussed, maybe some of you were not with us. For us, the supervisors, that's in a way the most challenging part. That means understanding what's your problem, understanding what is actually the research question, and finally to develop a proper theoretical or conceptual framework. After that, we are kind of relaxed in most of the cases, and you students are actually asked just to work, should I say hard or smart or both, and then we will actually definitely complete a good PhD. But that is really for me a challenge as I said, as a supervisor. And another question, which is maybe not so important anymore, but for you at that stage in a way as well, because after you have developed, created your conceptual framework, you have to think about the methodology. In a way, the conceptual framework informs or kind of guides you toward the proper methodology, but still you have to think what will be actually the methodology, what will be actually, if you want to, statistical, let's say, tests or models which will enable you to test your model, your framework, and see whether your anticipated relationships are there, are significant, something like that. Next slide, please. I don't like it. Okay, I don't like that, but I'll then actually erase it. Strange that we have to do that.
Yeah, usually it automatically is done.
Usually it disappears. Yeah, sorry for that, guys. So as I said, you are always welcome to ask questions. Do not wait till the end of the webinar. In case you have a question, just come in, grab the mic, or write something in the chat, and we will discuss it. So let us talk now. Are they the same or they are different? Maybe the next slide will help us to understand that a little bit better. So what we have prepared today are two really simple definitions. That is how we see them. I would not say that every single, let's say, professor or author sees them in that way, but based on our, let's say, experience and reading a lot of journal papers, we have developed these two. A conceptual framework is a framework where you present your assumed relationships, which are, as I have mentioned before, supported by theory, literature review sources, your observations, your potential findings, and or your assumptions. So that's kind of that's how we see it. And the opposite one, I'm not completely the opposite, but definitely a different one, is a theoretical framework, where it is developed based on existing theories and based on existing frameworks. I'll bring some examples of that just in order to explain you. So in this case, that's how we understand it. We are really actually focusing or taking the theories which are out there. And as you know, there are many different theories you can take to support your theoretical framework. So a difference, and I'll show you actually with examples. So there is definitely a difference. They are not the same. That is actually probably what this slide is telling us. On the other side, we do have to acknowledge that there are actually some other authors which see it a little bit in a different way, where they say, for example, everything what you develop is in most of the cases a conceptual framework, and it might have three different components. One could be a theoretical framework, because they are trying to say that it is anyway supporting the conceptual framework. Then you have the methodological framework. That means, in a way, how you will be dealing with your, if you want to, data collection, data analysis, and things like that, as well as actually analytical framework, where we are talking mostly about the data analysis methods. So that's another view. We should or have to actually present that as well. But our view is actually that they are kind of two different ones, but still in a way linked. Next slide, please, Andreas. That's okay, I'll do that. That's strange why actually Zoom is doing that today. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I also don't know it.
Okay.
Anyway, let's take it with a pinch of humor. As
long as we have actually a good eraser, everything works. Yeah, the next one. So let us discuss what I have just presented based on some examples. Next slide, please. Yeah. Probably, I would say some of you have heard about the theory of reasoned action. And we are saying theory of reasoned action. So this is a theory which has been proven, and it was published by Fishbein and Eisen in 1980s. I will not go actually into details what is it about, just trying actually to show you how we see the further developments. Okay, and as you see, here, this one is actually duplicated. This part actually is talking about theory of reasoned action. So Eisen took his own theory, let's say, and added another construct, which talks here about perceived behavior control. And that is how we see actually that we are developing or even extending a theory. So as you see, the theory was taken and then based on additional results a new theory was established where we were adding actually another influencing factor, if you want to, or we are saying another construct. So that's kind of the idea, how we are, let's say, taking a theory as your conceptual framework. And that can be said that that was actually taken as a conceptual framework, as a theoretical framework in order to go a little bit farther and develop actually another theory. Next slide, please.
Should be there. On?
No?
No?
Yeah, we are there. Just give me a
Okay.
second to erase that. Okay, cool. So here we go. Let me take now draw. And yeah. And maybe even should I say, I don't know, a clearer one where we are taking now our theory of planned behavior, which we have just developed in previous slide. And here you can see that that was actually a paper published 2 years ago, where the authors have taken two different theories. One theory is actually the theory of planned behavior, and then they added another theory, which is called actually marketing ethics theory. And what did they do? They tried actually to predict digital piracy intentions. So that is how I would understand actually a clear theoretical framework. So they were combining two different theories in order to use it as their theoretical framework. Some of us would maybe even say conceptual framework, and try actually to see whether those linkages are really actually existing or not existing. But that's kind of the idea, or maybe the biggest difference between the theoretical and, what did you say? Theoretical and, where are you? I don't hear you. And conceptual framework. Come on, come in. And I don't want to just preach, okay? I just want to see and hear you as well. Just come with your ideas. So that's kind of, for me, a typical and really a nice example how we combine two theories into a theoretical framework, which was afterwards tested and proven as a good idea. Next slide, please. I have to erase as well. And here we have actually three different frameworks where we can say that they looked rather actually as conceptual frameworks. So that's why we said actually rather conceptual frameworks. The idea is, as I have mentioned before, that definitely you need actually to support that with different other, if you want to, theoretical frameworks, theoretical models, theories, if you want to, and things, similar. That means everything what has been already published in the literature, and you are trying actually to take this theoretical support in order to justify, let's say, in this framework, I don't know, that culture is influencing implementation of quality management system in a least developed country. That was kind of an idea of this research project. So that means we are not taking directly one existing theory, but we are using different theories, different existing relationships in order to build your own conceptual framework. But it is not kind of really taken from the existing theories, how should I say, kind of one-to-one. And here is another one where we have taken two different, let's say, constructs which were kind of important. One was sustainability practices, and the other one was kind of organizational performance. And we were trying actually to link those things together and see how different factors, different constructs were actually contributing, let's say, or influencing to organizational performance. So if you go into the literature, you will not find anything kind of similar, but definitely there was a lot of support that, for example, sustainability practices are influencing organizational performance. But on the other side, you will have quite many actually papers out there which might say, no, there's no linkage, or there is actually kind of weak linkage, or even I don't know, kind of, different results. But that was actually done then in a little bit a different way. Some other things were added in order to understand those relationships better and try to contribute, let's say, to the understanding of the relationship between sustainability and organization performance. And the other one was kind of a similar thing, where there was an idea that asset management practices are contributing to organizational performance. And once again, if you go actually out there, you will not find that somebody else has done something like that, and definitely you will not be able to say that that was a clear theory or theoretical actually linkage between those. But after this PhD, those relationships were getting actually kind of clearer and should I say proven, maybe. Any questions so far? I hope I'm not talking too fast, and I'm not making you even more confused than you were before we started to talk. That actually, I'm drawing too much. Should I draw less?
No, that's fine.
I don't have too many. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Yeah, and that's another one. And that's another one where it goes a little bit towards what I have mentioned before. After you have another conceptual framework, after you have kind of established the framework, and as we said, your supervisors are happy with it, you got actually a green light, then you will have to think how you will test the relationships. And I mean, these two, both of them, were in a way tested using structural equation modeling, an advanced, should I say, tool in statistics which is able actually to test a little bit a more complex framework. So I'm just trying to say it goes along. After you have developed your conceptual framework, you will be having to think about that as well. So it is not the idea that you just bring a framework, unless that was actually the goal of your, let's say, PhD. That means that the outcome was since ever that you are trying to establish, trying to actually bring a new conceptual framework. That's something else. But then you will be probably, or you have been doing actually quite a lot in order to support why you think that that is actually really a valid, in a way, framework. So it is important that we think how we will be able to test it as well. So do not forget, please, and that's then actually the next stage. But from our perspective, is always a little bit easier stage, because you have read a lot. You have seen actually many methodologies in your papers. I mean, after you have read those 200 to 300 papers, everything's clear how you can or you should test your framework. Next slide, please. Okay. And now we are kind of, should I ask you, Andreas, to take over?
Yes, very much.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Bostjan, for that introductory part. And I think it came nice through from slide to slide how the complexity was enhanced. And I think this is also something to mention. It starts simple and it gradually develops. So it's nothing that you start at a very high complexity level, perhaps at the first day, but that will come to there. Another outtake that I took was the word purpose. So what's the purpose of working with those conceptual frameworks? Perhaps in the discussion now we also can go a bit further on that. But now we prepared a number of questions that we would want to discuss, but given the nature of this webinar, we also invite from the audience questions. And if you have any, then please do come frontward with them, either now or as the discussion evolves. Are there any questions at this point in time that you would like to ask or raise? Then please do come forward.
I mean, that's really the idea behind it, that you come with your questions. I mean, Paula has said lots to think about for sure. So can you I don't know, tell us what you were thinking about? In which direction does it go? Or anybody else? Let us just try to understand your thoughts, or even maybe your uncertainties or doubts. I guess that would be really helpful for all of us, because usually we say whatever one of us is not understanding, probably the majority of us is not, and we can discuss on that in detail and try to help you.
Good day, Paula. Microphone
Hi,
is open to you.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, there is lots to think about. As I was saying, I'm fairly early on in my PhD journey. I only started in September, so yeah, and I think I haven't really set my frameworks in stone yet. So I'm still at the stage where I'm doing an awful lot of reading, and you know, I think you sort of come into it. I have an idea myself of what they are, so it's just trying to solidify them and make them more concrete, I suppose.
Okay, good. So we usually have a little bit of fight between Andreas and myself when I say reading, but in these cases it really kind of helps to understand it. So if I may go then further actually, and just ask Prof. Valerie to talk about the purpose. I mean, I do have my ideas, but let us have another view on that as well. Please, Valerie.
Okay, thanks very much, Prof. Bostjan and Dr. Andreas and Paula for your comments too. So many purposes of having a theoretical conceptual framework, but at the very basic level, we need some kind of guiding framework to help us answer our research question. Our research question might, to some extent, be informed by the theoretical frameworks or theories in particular, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to devise some logic for examining what it is we want to examine, and that will also then help to inform how we actually examine and analyze. So it provides rigor. It's essential to have that base of rigor in your dissertation, underpinning what it is that you're planning to do. So I'm not talking about which one you should focus on, but simply having a robust, logical framework that's underpinned by theory and very sound conceptual logic, regardless of which one you're particularly favoring, is the reason why we need these, because the outcome of your research, the validity of your research, will be really questionable if you are simply going into a study without any basis that's informed by theory and conceptual thinking. And as Prof. Bostjan said, more often than not, the two are linked. In my view, if you are all social scientists, I'm not sure you are, but I would tend to wager that most of you will be using, to some extent, a conceptual framework, driven largely or not so largely by theoretical frameworks or certainly theoretical underpinnings. The pure sciences will tend to be those that would be using a specific tested, robust theoretical framework and simply testing it. That's very much more what we see in the pure sciences. In social sciences, again, I think as actually Prof. Bostjan mentioned, we have a very different changing environment. The context is very important. And so we often see other factors and variables coming into play that we want to test. So that's where our conceptual thinking and logic comes in. Okay.
Sorry for that.
No problem. So that's to start with where I'm thinking we might be thinking about purpose.
Yeah, because I mean, maybe what you have mentioned right now is that actually we have a framework and there are some additional elements which might be tested. So what I would like to say is just another context is usually for a PhD not enough. So that means if we take, let's say, something what has already existed, I mean, has been already, let's say, published, and you come and say, okay, I will just go from, many times you hear that, actually, I don't know, I just go from UK or from USA to a new context, which is now, I don't know, which country should I take? If you want to, no idea, where are you from, Paula? UK? So that...
Ireland.
Okay, that's a little bit close. Do we have somebody else coming from somewhere else? Doesn't matter. Let's say we are right now in the UAE, let us say to go to UAE. So if a student comes with something like that, we're usually saying that is actually not enough. And that in red right now, we have our, let's say, theoretical framework. Okay, then you will have to come with some additional ideas. Why do you think, for example, that, I don't know, I'll go as simple as that, that, for example, a culture in the UAE is in a way different as influencing, let's say, those two actually existing relationships. Or you might say some special enablers are actually influencing one of those or something like that. You know what I mean? So you cannot really just simply say, I will go into another country and see whether that is working or not working, because you have to bring something new. And that means, as we have said, I mean, that's how I see it, that you are using in red, okay, existing theoretical framework, and then you are working on it, as Prof. Valerie has said, in order to test some additional, let's say, elements or variables which might have a specific meaning or influence or something like that. And based on that, you are in a way developing using, let's say, theoretical framework, existing theoretical framework, and then adding your, let's say, own contribution in order to understand, let's say, in a context, but not context is not enough, in a context, actually, let's say, those relationships better, clearer, adding, let's say, as we said, value or something like that. I don't know if you do agree with me, Valerie?
Oh, absolutely. And we always highlight that to our PhD students, that contribution has got to be well beyond context. I mean, context might inform the importance of other variables, but that may not always be the case at all. And I have a very simple example here of where building on a theoretical framework can be done with a relatively straightforward thinking. Take, for example, a theoretical framework that looks at the influence of socioeconomic factors on educational achievement. Now, that will be underpinned by the relevant theoretical bases, but it may be that a contribution would be, actually, well, what about the role of ethnicity? What about the role of age? These might be factors that have not been incorporated into this theoretical framework, but nonetheless, through reading and another exploration, the researcher is able to conceive that these might also influence the outcome. So it's essentially, as Prof. Bostjan's got there in the blue on the screen, it's perhaps there's a role of another variable or even another construct that is theoretically relevant. And it may or may not be appropriate or different in different contexts, but this is a theoretical relevance, theoretical contribution, theoretical building on the existing framework that's important.
Thank you very much. both of you. We have 3 questions in the chat. May I go through them one by one?
Yeah.
Okay, so the first one is for Mary, and it's actually question number 3 from the list. At what stage in the doctoral journey is the framework developed? Professor Valerie, might I place the ball to you?
Okay, thank you. The first thing, as we were actually discussing before we joined here, that the first thing is really to get an understanding of what it is you're looking at. What is the research gap, the research problem, again, through reading, through experience, through possibly even some, initial investigation into areas of interest. So this should be nonetheless early. So once the research question is really developed, one of the things that will determine whether a conceptual theoretical framework is going to be most relevant is what is already known about that particular research area that you want to explore further. Theoretical frameworks are generally developed from existing theory that has been tested and well validated. Conceptual frameworks might be relying a little bit more on the finding newer contributions to that theory, or to even to creating theory. So depending a little bit on the area and the extent to which there is already established knowledge will also guide you toward conceptual versus theoretical, or some combination of both. But that should really be probably the next step. What is your research gap? What do you know? What knowledge is there already in this area? What kind of knowledge? What kind of exploratory or explanatory work exists out there? And therefore, where should I start pitching the foundation for my research? If that decision is not made early, everything you do subsequently is going to be contingent on that framework decision you've made at the beginning. So it's well worth spending time and a lot of discussion on making sure that, yes, you have some good conceptual thinking behind what you're doing. You want to use a conceptual or theoretical framework to support that. And that makes logical, there is sufficient logical sense to go on and start looking at appropriate methodologies. So early is the simple answer, early.
Early.
The simple answer is actually early and, should I say, evolving?
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may use this word actually as well. So what I would like to say is, let's say, as we have said before, the red one, that's a theory, okay? That's a theoretical framework. And then you are reading actually. And first of all, you might say, hey, there's another one. That's an interesting one. Maybe we can add something like that. And then you read actually further and say, and maybe based on my, let's say, interest, I would add something like that. And then you read further and you said, oh, that's actually such a pity. It has been already done. So I cannot do that because that would be no contribution. And then you read something new and you say, okay, and there's another one which might be of interest, and I'm trying to add something like that. So that's, for me, an idea that you are continuously developing your, let's say, conceptual framework. I usually say, have it on your ceiling if you want to, or having actually on your wall. And whenever you have read a few good journal papers, you think a little bit about it, and maybe you can some of them, just in a way now add and think about it. But as Prof. Valerie has said, definitely the theoretical support has to be there. So it's just not that you come and say, I'll do that, without actually explaining it, because as we have said, you will have to clearly justify your conceptual framework. You will have to justify your first research question, then conceptual framework, as well as actually all the hypotheses in your PhD. And for that, you will need actually to reference to cite actually. So that means you need support for something like that. But for me, the most important part, so I will say the nicest part, should I say, of the conceptual framework is, first of all, you see that you are building something new, and you can really actually develop that actually with time. And at one point, after, as I have said, I'll provoke once again, I say, after you have read actually your 200 or 300 papers, you will say, that is it. Your supervisor will say, okay, perfectly fine, we agree on that. And from here onwards, the things are getting actually totally clear. I mean, what you have established your link between your research question and your framework. So what's the next stage? The next stage is, if you are using quantitative methodology, you will just put actually your hypothesis in here, and then actually, here we go. You're almost ready to start collecting the data. That's kind of the idea is, from my perspective, and that's why I'm usually really, should I use the word, pushing my students to develop a conceptual framework and be able to clearly justify it, why they think that that is something which is supported, and why do they think that that is actually something what is a contribution. So as early as possible, probably, but do not rush. That's why you can actually slowly develop it. It will evolve while you are reading, while you are thinking, while you are having actually discussions with your supervisors and any other people. And as I said, at one point you will say, that's it.
Thank you very much. The next question, actually, as a matter of fact, is related to complexity, and you just covered a lot of what that question asks, but let me perhaps also come in. It's a bit tricky what supervisors say, what they mean, and what students understand. Now, Professor Bostjan already twice picked up on the 200 articles of reading.
At least.
But Professor Bostjan equally said, start simple. So that was the first message, which was confirmed and reinforced by Professor Valerie. Start simple. The second was, it's evolving, right? So from simple to complex, it's a long, long way. And over that long, long way, you will read the 200 articles. It's not that so you read them after you start with a simple model, because a lot of times that's very tempting to students, because reading is easily done, right? Hard work, critical, analytical work with your brain is painful. So it's easier to read 200 articles. It's not what neither Professor Valerie nor Professor Bostjan did say so far. So just for the notes. Now the question in the chat is, how complex should the framework be? Professor Valerie, can give an answer against the background?
Yeah, again, I would say on the side of simplicity, but sufficiency. So so a theoretical framework, there's a couple of things I really want to highlight here. If you're building on a theoretical framework conceptually, you'll be starting with that theoretical framework and building ideas into it. You might start the other way, thinking more conceptually and drawing on theory to support what you are wanting to do. Now, the theory will obviously have some frameworks associated with it, but the key thing is that you are not in any way violating the key variables and constructs that belong to that theory. Now, you may not want to or need to use every variable and every relationship the way that the theoretical framework does if you're building conceptually, but you have to understand and utilize what is, you have to utilize the whole theory. So for example, when we look at using a theoretical framework to support a new conceptualization, we cannot, I use the word cherry pick. So a theoretical framework will have a number of variables, as we see in Prof. Bostjan's artistic piece on the screen, and in the theory of planned behavior and other examples that we looked at. We cannot just pull out a variable and say, I don't want to look at that, because that theory, that theoretical foundation is then going to become partial. It's not going to be complete. It will become less relevant. So when we're using a theoretical framework to build a conceptualization, we've got to be true to the theory, the elements of that theoretical framework. We cannot just pull out something that we don't want to use because it doesn't suit us, or because it's looking at like it might be becoming too complex. We are then destroying the foundation and the robustness of that theory. So that's one thing. Always be sure that you're using a theory in its complete form, especially when you're operationalizing it. The other thing is, again, I'm not really necessarily answering the question here. That might build complexity, but at the same time, you in trying to avoid complexity, you must avoid pulling apart theories and reconstructing them in ways that suit you before you start building your own conceptualization around that. The other thing that's very important is, I think we alluded to this sometime earlier in the conversation, that sometimes theories are competing. There will be different perspectives. I'll give you an example. In my area of internationalization, there are two theoretical frameworks that are actually almost polar opposite in their conceptual logic and theoretical logic. One is traditional internationalization theory. I'm not sure if anybody's involved in this area, which says that firms go international very slowly, gradually, as they build up experience. That's been a foundational theory for a long time. A relatively newer theory is called born global, one terminology for it, which actually says, no, the other theory didn't quite get it right. Instead, companies go very rapidly into new markets. Now, those are very different. Now, we cannot use both those theories to support our conceptual logic. We have to go one way or the other. We obviously can refer to differences and we can compare them, but we cannot mix them up as our theoretical foundation. So those are two things that would add complexity if we were trying to do that, and it would not make theoretical or conceptual sense. Also, the just pulling apart a theory to suit our purposes does not work either. So it's a question of making sure that whatever you end up with, don't worry about complexity so much as theoretical and conceptual logic, and being true to the particularly theoretical background and your own conceptual logic building on that.
Thank you. Professor Bostjan, any comments to that before we come to the next question?
I totally agree with what we have, what was said. Do not try to make things complex. Don't do that. It makes no sense, actually. In case you would like to add something, let's say, but then really you have to justify that in a clear way. But simply, we might actually have, I don't know, a mediation or something like that. If you have a good justification, why not? And then you will test actually for mediation. It's okay, perfectly fine. But do not try to, how should I say, overload just because you think that is actually a good work. That does not mean that if there are actually many, as I have done here, many colors in there, that's actually really something special or something like that. And something else, do not forget, you will have to test it. In case you are using your conceptual framework and then test it with let's say, statistical methods, you will have to have a proper tool to do that as well. That goes actually as the next stage. So if you want to build something what is actually almost not possible to test, it will not work. What we have not touched, maybe I can add that, is that sometimes you might start, because no, that was the question in a way triggered actually. Sumit actually asked something about the liberty or something like that. The question, you don't have the liberty to change the theory. That's clear, okay? That's actually understood, I would say. But something else, if you sometimes we really tap in a new topic, and then you might probably start even with qualitative part. qualitative methodology. That would mean that you, for example, I don't know, have conducted 16, 20 or something like that interviews, and based on that, you might develop something new or add something. For example, that means you can develop your, should I say, theoretically new framework, and then you will test it, let's say, using the quantitative methodology. And then at the end, you will be able to see and say, okay, these ones are part of it, these ones have been these ones have been kind of approved or not, or things like that. That's another thing. That means there's another way that you kind of build your own conceptual framework using results of your, let's say, qualitative part. Do you agree on that, Valerie?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. And I think just looking at that liberty to change things, with conceptual frameworks. One of the definitions of the differences between theoretical and conceptual frameworks do differ. But I think fundamentally we're all on the same page here. But one view is that theoretical frameworks tend to be much broader, and conceptual frameworks add detail through, adding new variables, new perspectives, new constructs, etc. So I think when we have a question like as we have here, I don't know if I'm jumping to the next question ahead of time, Dr. Andreas, but
no, I think the questions 4, 5, and 6 are equally covered now.
Yeah,
so you're welcome.
Thank you. So when I say, can we take relationships that might come from a theoretical framework as being the same as a stakeholder relationship, even though stakeholder relationships may not have been measured specifically, in that theory. So if the theory is broad in the sense that there is a relationship, there is a link between, association between relationships and an outcome, then absolutely we can test that theory with a specific representation of that variable, if there is still the logic behind that, and you're not contradicting that original foundation of that framework. So yes, as long as you're clear, but that will be most likely a conceptual contribution to that theoretical framework. I don't know if my colleagues agree with that interpretation.
I mean, I do agree, definitely. And maybe answering the third question coming from Sumit. You said, should we get the conceptual framework tested by expert opinion? Maybe I wouldn't say test, because if you want, I mean, depends. If you want to use actually statistical methods, then that will really not work in that way. But yeah, definitely. I mean, we many times kind of bring in some experts in the area, which might kind of, yeah, in a way validate even before you go and test it with statistical methods. You can use that as well. It's many times actually a welcomed step in between. The same thing is before you prepare, for example, questions for qualitative methodology, kind of for the interviews. You will many times have some experts you might talk to in order to tell you, okay, kind of, agree, support, or maybe you can change a little bit the question and things like that, or add something just in order to help you, that you have actually, should I say, more confidence in that, what you have been trying to develop, trying to actually ask.
Thank you. Also keeping an eye on the time. Let me ask, please, on question 7 to not have that uncovered. Are there any alternatives? Are there any different ways of working? Could we just not consider theoretical or conceptual frameworks? Might I ask that to the two of you? Who would want to go first then?
Oh, okay, our own question. I'll let Prof. Bostjan go first on that one, and then I'll come back and.
It's okay. I mean, it's a little bit a tricky one.
Yeah.
I would say, as I said, I'm really how should I say, a friend of frameworks. As I have mentioned before, you have people who are talking about conceptual, theoretical, analytical, and methodological, but that's something else. If we kind of stick to these two, to the conceptual and theoretical, how should I say? Yeah, I mean, another way is what I have just mentioned, is that you start building, let's say, your conceptual framework. As I have mentioned before, you can have an idea, but there's really no theory which might support you, or you are not kind of really actually seeing that that is supporting actually your views. So as I mentioned, you might go with your interviews, for example, first, in order to understand the topic of your PhD. And based on that, you will be then developing. I'm not avoiding actually, okay, the answer to the question, but you will be developing in a way your, let's say, conceptual framework. And then, as I said, you might test it. So it's not always that you have to have one and then play around with it or use it, but you can develop yours as well. And finally, what Prof. Valerie has said before, you will at one point still use to bring some theoretical support for that, what you have kind of developed, because in most of the cases, or in many cases, you will anyway get some relationships, most probably, which will be linked to some theory which has been already established. But even, you know, I recall, let's say, one of my PhDs some time ago was on service quality, and the results have shown really some new things which haven't been kind of known before. And because of that, then we extended a little bit, let's say, our views, and we went towards psychology a little bit more to be able to justify what we have found. So that means we have, should I say, I would say crossed the limits, but in a way, first of all, we have kind of our framework and our box and our kind of limits for the project, but the results have indicated, even pushed us, that we had to explain that. And because of that, we went actually into another area, brought actually the theoretical justification for our results. I don't know if I answered that in a proper way, or I hope I have not confused you too much. Valerie, what you are saying, how would you answer this question?
My turn now, right? Well, being a qualitative researcher, basically, I would say 100% that we don't have to start with a conceptual theoretical framework. It's actually quite difficult to start research without having some even subconscious knowledge or bias around, you know, theory or concepts. But pure grounded theory basically says we start with a blank sheet of paper and we build up, and then we put conceptual ideas together. And so we will end up most likely with, generally speaking, a conceptual framework of some kind. When we look at conceptual theoretical frameworks, fundamentally, it's just about, they're about a relationship. There's a, you know, the impact of something on something else. At its very simplest form. Now, theoretical frameworks, they're more developed, known, tested. Conceptual frameworks, less well defined. But at the end of the day, that's kind of what we're trying to explore. Now, whether we start with assumptions about how some of these relationships might be impacted with a conceptual theoretical framework, or whether we build from our own ground level observation and analysis, doesn't matter. It depends on the kind of research that you're doing. And we didn't really touch on methodologies at all. Well, not in detail, at least we have covered. But yeah, we don't have to start with conceptual theoretical frameworks, but a conceptual logic implies that we have to have some kind of relationship coming out of what we're doing. We're looking at the impact of something on something else in certain situations or circumstances.
Sorry, Valerie. What I
that's
wanted
fine.
to say is at one point, we will be developing kind of a conceptual framework. That's what I would say.
Yeah.
So you might start with it, or with the usually you start with the theoretical framework,
Yeah.
or you are trying to build your conceptual framework.
Yeah.
So
it's difficult
that's
to build.
how I would.
Sorry.
It's difficult, yeah. So, but at one point you have probably to have something which is representing your research.
Mhm.
And that is usually really closely and clearly linked to the, as we have said, the research question tells you a lot.
Mm.
But the next step in explaining and clarifying, I would say, is the framework.
Absolutely. And your framework actually may only be simply, proposing associations. They don't have to necessarily be cause and effect, but there is some kind of set of relationships going on at some point in that. And I think it's unavoidable, beginning or end.
So the short answer is yes.
Yes.
The question is just at what point in time.
Mm-hmm.
Do we start with a blank piece of paper? Means we do not really know what the research is about, or do we have a clear idea about the research and therefore we can already put down some frameworks that could be considered?
What I mean, for me, the outcome of this question would be that at one point you will be probably having a framework. So it might be an alternative path to it, but finally you will end up with a framework.
Mm-hmm.
Professor Bostjan, I just needed to take a screenshot of that piece of art to
Always
not be
welcome.
lost.
Always welcome.
Yeah, our time is literally speaking up. The hour is over. Is there a final question from the audience that you would like to ask to Professor Valerie or Professor Bostjan? If not,
should be 10,000 ones.
Yeah, if not,
no, I'm just reading the last one, kind of complexity from survey items perspective. See, yeah, data collection is always a challenge, and in case you have a complex framework with many constructs, that might lead to a long survey as well, and that might be a little bit a challenge than to, as you have said, to, how should I say, get respondents actually to work on it and give you actually the answers to all the questions. That's why we are trying actually, not once again to make it simple, but in case, I mean, we have had, unfortunately, surveys which were, I don't know, 80 questions long or something like that. We were not happy with them. But the theoretical, now coming back, even the theoretical framework introduced 54 questions. So in order to add our, let's say, ideas or students' ideas and broaden it to understand it actually in another context, we had to add another 4, or was it actually 5 or something like that, constructs. And these another 5 constructs have added another 30 questions. So it is like that. But as I said, the theoretical framework was there, and we had to include it in order to understand how those additional, let's say, constructs were influencing the idea behind it.
And just finally, if I may, just coming back to Sumit's question. So we are saying we're not picking up part of the theoretical framework, but complete exactly that scenario, that the theoretical framework required 54 questions, however many, for all the variables to be tested. The student couldn't just pull out 20 randomly to make the survey simpler. They have to be there. You can't pull it apart.
And something else, when we're talking about the last sentence, okay? You're talking about surveys. Once again, please do not forget that in most of the cases, you should not develop your own questions, statements for your survey. Okay, unless, I mean, you can go through that way, definitely, but then you will have to test your, let's say, survey first. Okay, that's another thing where what many students are doing a mistake. They think, oh, I just asked a few statements, put them in there, and then here we go. Definitely not. Once again, the constructs are coming from existing good research, good journal papers. Okay, that's so important. Please do not do that. If you do, I mean, if you want to do a pilot study with, I don't know, 80 or 100 actually, answers first, and then test it, and then actually do the different statistical analysis in order to have a final one which you can use, then yeah, very welcome to do it. But in case you don't want to do it in a different way. Sorry, Andreas.
No. Just the word want I don't like. It's not about the choice of the researcher. It's about what the research problem asks for. This is something, if we give students too much choice and freedom, then that's what they take, choice and freedom. So perhaps it's like a bit more what is asked for, and therefore it should be done. Yeah, with this, in 2 weeks of time, you will have the chance again to see Professor Bostjan Gomiscek on here talking about identifying research gaps. But for today, I would like to thank the two of you, Professor Valerie, Professor Bostjan, for making yourself available. And with this, yeah, I wish everyone a lovely weekend.
Yeah, I just say, I just saw that actually one of